After a somewhat disappointing 2021, I was really optimistic about this year for gaming. Last year, the most exciting games to release weren't really all that big. There were no Zeldas, no Skyrims, no Grand Theft Autos, no From Software games, nothing from Naughty Dog, no true masterpieces, so to speak. This was a year where Ratchet & Clank, Forza 5, and Guardians of the Galaxy may have been the best games of the year. I mean, they're pretty good games, but do they stand up to all-time classic games like The Witcher 3 or Breath of the Wild? Hell, my favorite game from 2021 was an indie game called Death's Door, which wasn't even that popular. There just wasn't a lot on offer. It was the calm before the storm, or so we thought. Gaming in 2022 was not what I expected, seeing as how I was looking forward to so many games that didn't even get released. Delays were a big part in 2022, and as you'd expect, they hit the big boys. Starfield was the first on the chopping block, initially set to launch this year in November, and now it's been pushed back into some unknown future date. I think I could speak for every single sci-fi and space nerd when I say I'm pretty damn excited for Starfield and the prospect of exploring different planets, characters, and storylines in the Bethesda universe, so to speak. Even though it's being made by the same team that made Fallout 76, my biggest personal disappointment of 2018, I was super stoked to get my hands on this game this year, but all we received was a rather lukewarm trailer which honestly looked pretty damn janky and unpolished. I'm hoping the combat mechanics are ironed out and that the 100 planet count doesn't create another No Man's Sky syndrome, which is wide as an ocean yet deep as a puddle. Starfield, I beg you please no. Time will tell if this game attains greatness. Either way, it's a massive game that was delayed. Here are some of the really big games that were delayed this year. Hogwarts Legacy, Stalker 2, Forspoken, Suicide Squad, Dead Island 2, Skull and Bones, and Avatar. Again, more delays this year. Some of these games were massively anticipated throughout the year, but they've all been pushed back into next year or even some of them 2024, including two awesome looking games called Redfall and a possible gem named Replaced, a game with an absolutely beautiful art style. It's expected this day and age to have some delays, and with the restrictions of the pandemic, productivity and collaboration hasn't and may never be the same for the foreseeable future, so I can understand pushing back release dates. I just wasn't expecting all of these games to get delayed. Though I'm glad, it remains to be seen, but it's likely for the best as these games will get the development time and more importantly the polish they need. However, as we've seen from many half-finished games throughout the last few years, post-production time is often used to polish games when honestly it should be the other way around. We live in an era where pre-order culture is part of our DNA, which is why publishers can be so comfortable releasing things that aren't even remotely close to being ready. When 1 million people pre-ordered Battlefield 2042 a year before launch, you can understand why the game still to this very day is a husk of what it should have been. Obviously, trailers are half to blame. It's not entirely the consumer's fault. Much of what we see in the media is manipulated to cause trigger pulling, but still support the companies that don't rush out half-finished games or titles that breed manipulative monetization. It's better for everyone in the end if we hold these publishers accountable. Perhaps it's a pipe dream, but I'm holding on to it still. 2022 was also the year of many disappointments beyond the delays. One of my most anticipated games this year was the Calisto Protocol, which came out recently and was shockingly average. Very rarely do big budget single player games influenced from the past get greenlit, so this was especially important to the gaming culture. And being pretty much a Dead Space copycat, at least on the books, it seemed like a surefire hit. Develop a broody atmosphere, have some interesting gameplay, tie in the combat around resource management, weave in some interesting characters and premise, all with the benefits of the Unreal 5 engine. I mean, what could go wrong? You literally have the golden ticket blueprint. Unfortunately, it just didn't do it for me. The visuals are nice. If it was a girl, the Calisto Protocol would actually be a fine-ass woman because the game is smoking hot to look at. The sound design is also quite awesome, and the lighting creates beautiful, eerie contrast. But it's just not up to snuff and very unfocused. And truthfully, something shiny that doesn't have a lot of substance to it. It's not a bad game by any means, but the story, combats, the enemy variety, and the way you play it just isn't very satisfying. Especially the weird dodge mechanic, the over-reliance on fiddly melee combats, the underutilized story characters, and the emphasis on rinse and repeat action over actual tension. Furthermore, it misses the most important part of the equation, those quiet moments in between the chaos. That is what holds that tension in place. You gotta lean into that survival element of Dead Space if you want to emulate it, and the fact that it's not in there is shocking to say the least. It's one of those games that could have been so much better if it just took the time to understand what it was trying to emulate and why Dead Space does it so well. This was the game in 2022 that I expected to be fantastic. Calisto was inspired and designed from a spot close to our hearts, yet the end result feels ironically uninspired. Here's hoping the Dead Space remake is awesome. I was also extremely disappointed in some other games I was anticipating, like Ghostwire Tokyo, Dying Light 2, Saints Row, and most recently Overwatch 2 and Gotham Knights. If I had to put a label on these games, I'd lump them all into the category of pretty poopy. A lot of the issues in these games boil down to design issues, whether it's poor utilization of open worlds, bad use of license, awful performance, or in the case of Overwatch 2, releasing a sequel that is so similar to the first game that they're practically indistinguishable. I'm sorry, but if you're gonna put a 2 behind the name of your game, you actually need to make it 2. If FIFA, Call of Duty, Madden, and some of the other franchise games across the industry don't get a pass for doing so, then neither does Overwatch. As someone who has put over 1,000 hours in Overwatch, having quit after 2 hours of playing Overwatch 2 is just so goddamn depressing. Patches Overwatch 1 could have easily resulted in the exact same experience. Speaking of Call of Duty, I was also not expecting to enjoy this game, but the surprising part was I really enjoyed Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. Call me crazy, but actually I have more hours in this game than I do Elden Ring. I like it because it's a different game than anything they've put out in the last 15 years. I appreciate that you have to play slower and there's no slide canceling, no bunny hopping, and you can't really play it up while you're running. Positioning is important because of these things and checking your corners. Yes, it leads to camping, but it's also something fresh. Most importantly though, the game has a tremendous amount of content. Sure, the skin grind is pretty terrible, but there's lots of cosmetics, loads of attachments, a huge suite of game modes, a pretty good single-player campaign, a free DMZ mode that is quite fleshed out, though there needs to be some longevity features added. The bones of it are pretty solid though. An awesome gunsmith feature, a weapon tuning, and of course an entirely free BR mode. Seriously, Warzone tuning is pretty fun and it's free. You might have a personal vendetta against COD like I did for a long time, and I can't blame you for that, but you have to admit this is a lot of game here. There is no comparison between this game and Battlefield 2042, and that is something I was not expecting this year. Speaking of being pleasantly surprised, enter the indie mid-level scene. Simply put, it was a phenomenal year this year for mid-level games and indie games. These kinds of games are getting so goddamn good as time passes. Once you filter through the trash, you can find some beautiful creative gems here. And in 2022, there were some awesome budget games, including Stray, a brilliant game about a cat, I guess you could say. Tunic, a masterpiece in game design. The Case of the Golden Idol, talk about a dope-ass detective game. Sifu was unexpectedly fun. There's Ollie Ollie World, which is a pretty fun skateboarding game. There's Vampire Survivors, Where the Hell Did My Life Go? Entropy, 02, Hyper Demon, the FPS from the future, Cult of the Lamb, and so much more. And when I say a lot more, I mean a lot more games, and I can't even count them, so I won't even try. Tally up all the AAA games that released this year, and these games easily eclipse them in terms of straight up fun and creativity. A special shout out to Immortality, Neon White, and Signalis. Seriously, these games are so damn good you'd be cheating yourself if you miss them. Signalis specifically is, damn, this is a really good game. It's one of my favorite survival horror games of all time, and it is awesome in the way that they have created the level design, the narrative experience, and the feeling of mystery. This is what kept me hooked. You'll be bathing in contemplative cutscenes, wicked art styling, and crazy cool spooky storytelling and atmosphere. And the gameplay feels retro, but in the best of ways, with perfect restrictions and inventory management. Knowing less is more here, so do yourself a favor and just check this one out when you have a dark and stormy night on your hands. Speaking of more unexpected surprises, the continuing trend to bring once exclusive Sony games to PC. Games like Spider-Man, Horizon, Sackboy, Days Gone, and even some of the Uncharted games are trickling their way into Steam over the past year. Most of these games come with 60 frames per second standard, and some of them have advanced graphics options like enhanced ray tracing, which in my opinion makes them the preferred edition. The great part about these ports is that PC players can pick them up a little bit after they've been released, so we're not disrupting the benefits of their initial exclusivity. It's important to have exclusive games as it promotes competition and pushes the industry forward, so timed exclusivity tends to be the happy medium, and I'm glad to see so many great PS games come to the PC market, especially the masterpiece of 2018's God of War. My hope is that the controller gets better support because the haptic feedback really changes those experiences for the best, and currently not all of them have that support. What was not an unexpected surprise this year was Elden Ring. I think we all knew the game was going to be big. It seems everything From Software touches these days turns to gold, and they have become my second favorite developer. Just to put this in perspective, I've never played Armored Core, but I am hyped as shit for 6. That's just how good their titles are and their reputation is. Elden Ring for me is easily the game of the year. It's not just a game, this is a phenomenon that sprouted endless speedrunning, memes, and one of the biggest communities in gaming history. The amount that this game was talked about was just astronomical. The freedom the game gives you, the choice in the expansive world design is just incredible to play. It simply reminds me of an early generation of gaming. The game begins just having you open the great doors and seeing Limgrave basically come to life in front of your eyes, right? There's absolutely no quest markers or guides or arrows or anything. It's like when you played Zelda 1 as a kid and the opening screen gave you literally 4 directions to go, with no hints at where you should go. That same level of discoverability is what Elden Ring is all about. Sure, it's got some repeat bosses and it's titanically long. King-sized doesn't describe it in candy terms. Honestly, even though one playthrough was more than enough for me because it is so gigantic, talk about a quest, man. Talk about an adventure. The true meaning of gaming. This is what is captured with barely a spoken word, presented to you in the most modest of terms. Here is the world, do what makes you happy, embrace the challenge, and discover your own game outside of any bounds. It is truly a magical game meant to be savored in both thought and play, and it is easily one of my top games of all time. It's funny because as great as Elden Ring was, there was a huge lull in the AAA market leading up to the end of the year when God of War Ragnarok released. Now, I was equally impressed with Ragnarok, but in a completely different way. It's amazing how different games give you different sensations. I consider Elden Ring a game for play, as so much of what you get from it is derived from gameplay. There's so little explicitly said, you really never stop to learn about anything from a cutscene, you basically absorb the game through play. Again, like Zelda 1. God of War Ragnarok is an entirely different beast. You spend hours listening to fables from a talking head. You spend quite literally 3.5 hours watching carefully crafted cutscenes with Hollywood-level performances and motion capture. Every word was meticulously written. Every frame, every animation, every look Kratos gives to his son. The delivery of the lines, the downtime, the traveling, the characters, the story, the set pieces. These things are not servicing the actual play, they're servicing the entertainment and experience of the game, hinged on that curated presentation. It's like you're watching a movie almost, and the action scenes are the moments that you actually play. Now, I adore this kind of game, that's why they call it a linear game. Sure, it has a hybrid open world, but you're meant to absorb a story rather than discover an adventure, and that is a huge difference. Such an experience hits different on so many different emotions and levels, and that is the true beauty of gaming, that we can have such a fundamentally different experience in one game than another, and they all affect us in their own individual ways. If I could play one game again this year, it would likely be Elden Ring, but if I could have one story experience this year, it would definitely be Ragnarok. 2022 was not what I expected. I thought it would be one of the best years in gaming since last year was kind of a letdown. Yes, there were some gems and some all-time greats, but if you compare it to years past, it really wasn't that sensational. Elden Ring is a masterpiece, but let's be real here, the AAA landscape was pretty barren. Xbox released literally nothing. There were some pretty good first-party games from Nintendo, like Xenoblade 3, Bayonetta 3, Sparks of Hope, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, and Splatoon 3, but zilch from Xbox. As a lifelong gamer, I am appalled to see such first-party games being ignored on this impressive piece of hardware. It's embarrassing. Sony carried the torch like usual, pumping out good games all year like Horizon, which I thought was amazing, and a remake to The Last of Us, though surprisingly, with a price tag that was perhaps too high. I personally think The Last of Us is worth its weight in gold, but it needed to be a remake, not a remaster for that price, and the number one thing that it deserves was the gameplay system from Part 2. That right there would have quite literally made it the GOAT. The year did though end on a bang with the Game Awards, which I'm shocked to say was absolutely fantastic, and I enjoyed just about every moment of it. Looking forward to 2023, I can honestly say I'm pretty excited about some of the games on offer. Games like Star Wars Jedi Survivor, Hades 2, the next Zelda game, most of the games that got delayed this year will probably drop as well, Street Fighter 6 and more, including Redfall, Starfield, and Diablo 4. Like, these are primo tellagio games here. I just hope somehow, someway, Diablo 4 does not turn out to be a filthy loot box infested bonanza. So yeah, that was 2022 in a nutshell. 2 really big games, lots of great indie games, lots of delays, and lots of familiar faces absent, like Assassin's Creed and Far Cry. It was a pretty decent year for gaming, not amazing, but ironically, it ended up being exactly what I thought last year was going to be, the calm before the storm. Here's hoping for a phenomenal year in gaming next year. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care.